Hello and welcome to Inside Update, a show brought to you by InsideInvestigator.org. We're a nonprofit newsroom on a mission to root out corruption in Connecticut through investigative journalism. My name is Connor Dragotis. I'm the managing editor here, and today I'm joined by Catherine Revelo to talk about two things. One is her most recent investigation involving some campaign finance issues that she has written about. Really interesting investigation that is, I think, only going to become a bigger story over the next year or two. And second is that we are going to chat a little bit about UConn. The school has made some interesting moves when it comes to transparency. And we went to Hartford to fight it out with the FOIC, and that yielded even more confusion and I guess in some ways disappointment in the way these things are being handled. So, first and foremost, though, Catherine, how are you doing today? And then we'll jump into Act Blue.
I'm doing great, Connor. How are you?
Life is good. It's not raining, so I feel like every moment that that's not happening, I feel very lucky this
Well,
month.
it's not Saturday yet, so of course it's
Exactly. That is so true. Yeah, it has to wait for the weekend in order to really, really start a downpour. Um, Speaking of, I guess, raining money, if nothing else, you wrote an investigation called Acting Blue: Evidence of Fraudulent Political Donations Targeting Retirees, specifically, obviously, with a focus on Connecticut, but this is something that is allegedly happening nationally. Talk about what's going on in Connecticut for us.
right. So I think most people are probably familiar with Act Blue and Win Red, which are the two big donation platforms that the Democrats and the Republicans use nationally. Um, uh, Connecticut. Local and state elections don't use it because of some of the way that campaign finance law works in the state. But a lot of national candidates use it to funnel donations to their campaigns. And, nationally, we have seen a lot of allegations that have been brought specifically against Act Blue this time, although there have been other allegations have been against both platforms in the past, essentially that they're kind of lax security policies have enabled, what are quote unquote straw donors to make donations that appear to be from one particular person, but are actually coming from somebody else. And if you look at the federal election, the FEC data, you can get kind of a raw record of what's going on with these donations, and there are some definite flags in these where you can see that people who are either unemployed or who are retired, so people who you wouldn't expect to have, $10,000 a month sitting around to make political donations, are doing that, and they're doing that at extremely high levels, um, with extremely frequent donations that are going to, dozens of different campaigns.
And I think one of the things that you pointed out too is that at the end of the day, it's not just that, hey, these people are giving more than the data would suggest, their lifestyle would suggest that they can. It's that they also say they never made these donations, right?
Yeah,
They've just
correct.
basically stepped away from the whole thing. They're stuck in the middle.
Yes, so that's part of this investigation basically began when Dominic Rapini, who is a cybersecurity professional and a former Secretary of State candidate, brought us a bunch of FEC data and some affidavits from people that he had them sign, that basically said, hey, I've pulled all this data from the FEC. It shows that you have given, tens of thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands over your donor lifestyle. Does this reflect your actual history of giving to campaigns? And a bunch of people said, no, it doesn't, and signed affidavits to that effect saying, this is not money that I have donated.
And it's also as the headline alludes to here, this is retirees or the elderly who especially in the digital banking age. I don't know about your family situation, but my grandfather is still balancing a checkbook on paper, so these digital donations are perhaps less likely to be caught. They're especially if it's not actually reflecting in their bank statement. I mean, I don't know. I'm not out here just going out checking my FEC data on a regular basis to see if my name is being used. So it kind of requires a third party taking a closer look for this stuff to even be uncovered, right? We don't know the extent of this alleged corruption.
Right. Essentially, because these are straw donors, i.e., I could go and donate money in your name, Connor, today, and you wouldn't know about it because it would be coming out of my bank account. So there would be no way that you would know that that transaction had even occurred unless I told you that. So, that's kind of the issue here. And the concern is, if you're not a citizen of the United States, you are barred from donating to political campaigns in the country. And so the concern, and this has become kind of the forefront of national politics. There was an executive order signed by Donald Trump recently asking that this be looked into, is that this is a way for potentially foreign operatives to skirt that ban and to essentially funnel money into campaigns in the country.
And the benefit there is, that's a, I feel like maybe that's beyond our scope. At some point we should probably get further into, or ask someone about, like, I don't know, why does someone from halfway across the world want to influence American elections, right? There's a lot of there's a lot of probably speculation there, but ultimately, I guess the corruption that's near and dear and close to home is our friends and neighbors who, I mean, some of these people are alleged to have made upwards of 30 donations per day through this system. And they're sitting there, and, ostensibly your name, your reputation, you know, who you are is being associated with something that you didn't actually do. So it's just pretty much a basic fraud. I mean, it's fraud, without a doubt, right? I mean, even without the geopolitical implications to wade into.
Right, absolutely. And I think, anytime, particularly you're talking about political donations, and there's a section of this article where we delved into the fact that this data is even available is a little bit of a fluke. Because if you donate to a normal political campaign that's not going through a bundler like ActBlue, um, if you're donating under $200, that is not even publicly recorded. And there have been a couple of lawsuits brought against the fact that this is disclosed because it is potentially a First Amendment issue. And we've seen some cases of people who say, I would like to donate to political campaigns, but if that's public, then I'm afraid that that's going to harm my reputation or my business or something like that. So the fact that these records are, essentially fraudulent, as money is being donated in people's names when they haven't actually done that, has the potential to have that kind of impact.
That's so fascinating. It's distressing as well. I mean, is there a way for people to check? You could look up yourself in the FEC records just to double check that the giving is accurate, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The FEC has a public database. It's very easy. You can go in, you can search your name, you can search anybody else's name. There's a bunch of different filters that you can apply. And one other thing I do want to make sure that we mention while we're talking about this, Connor, and we did mention it in the story, is that the Attorney General's office has been kind of moot over whether or not they're actually looking into this. We asked them, specifically if they had seen recent news stories, if they had any intention of looking into this, because the Attorney General's office sometimes puts out 2 or 3 different press releases a day for different cases, sometimes dealing with national politics that they're involved with. So this seems like something that they might want to look into and make sure Connecticut residents are safe. And we were essentially stonewalled and told that there's an ongoing consumer protection investigation into ActBlue and WinRed, which is for a totally separate issue. It has to do with recurring donations that people were automatically signed up for a couple of years ago, and essentially told that because those investigations, which are completely separate, are still ongoing, they wouldn't answer any questions about this current issue.
It was a fairly annoying sidestep in the communication record that you had with them. Where you were, I think, very clearly and fairly asking about what is obviously happening right now, and they were talking, in their response they're like, oh well, what if we talked about this thing that wasn't actually related to what you care about. And you're right. I mean, I half of my inbox practically is from Attorney General Tong sending out press releases about various things that he's working on. We've also run into problems tracking down what that financial record looks like, right? All of these lawsuits that are happening, I think, it's definitely a matter of public concern. I was actually speaking with several folks yesterday as part of our June fundraising effort. I'm, calling every single person who has ever donated to Inside Investigator, and I can tell you, multiple people said, I'm very curious how much we are spending on, national politics when I really want to be helping people in my community, in my backyard. And I did have to share with them, we've asked, we've tried to get this information, and like you said, we've been stonewalled start to finish. It's a very frustrating place to be when your job is helping to inform and educate folks in this community.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And I know that's a conversation we've had multiple times before because, right, if you're not familiar with how these kind of lawsuits works, you have to pay to file an amicus brief and it's not cheap. So how much is the state of Connecticut spending on that? We don't know essentially because they're written by in-house attorneys in the Attorney General's office and we haven't really found a good way to track what the actual price tag is for that.
Before we wrap up Act Blue, can we talk about this last section? The header is coming to Connecticut? Question mark. And there could be changes that would allow Act Blue to be used a little bit differently in this state, perhaps exacerbating the problem if this isn't sorted out.
Yeah, so there was a bill that was introduced in 2024 that would have essentially allowed Act Blue to accept donations from state and local campaigns. The issue right now is, right, if you've ever made an online donation from a charity or to a political donation, you've probably gotten like the question, do you want to pay the credit card processing fee, essentially so that that charity doesn't have to eat the cost of it and take it out of your donation. But the
Yep.
problem is with Connecticut's public elections funding program, that's considered a tip, which is considered an in-kind donation and is banned if you're receiving CEP. So if you're in the CEP program, you can't use these platforms. And so there was essentially legislation that would have changed that classification to allow um, these platforms to come in and um, take donations for state and local candidates.
Okay.
But there was, if you, and you can read it in the piece, there was kind of a little bit of a political battle that went on with certain legislators over that. It hasn't been taken up since. It did not appear during this election cycle, or during this legislative section. Geez, election cycle. We are still a year out from that. Let's not hurry that
Don't
up.
rush it. Don't rush it.
Yeah, right. The SEEC, I know, also had some concerns with the breadth of the language in it too. So.
Okay. Well, we'll keep our eyes out during the next legislative session to see what comes back, and hopefully we'll get some additional clarity here on. It would be great. Obviously, one of the biggest frustrations of being a journalist is we don't have the power to kind of get under the hood like a law enforcement agency can through subpoenas or otherwise pushing to get that kind of transparency. So I'll be very curious to see what gets pulled out in the next months and perhaps next few years here. Um, Speaking, I guess, of transparency, let's talk about Yukon because there is definitely some information that is being withheld. And despite our best efforts, it looks like this process is going to get dragged out a little more. Do you want to, I guess, just give us a quick background on that situation? And then I'll talk a little bit about going to Hartford and some of the stuff that Yukon rolled out.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you followed some of our published work, you know that we've been trying for, right, it's over a year at this point, Connor,
Oh, yeah.
to get information about investigations and allegations of sexual misconduct by faculty and staff at UConn and the CSCU system from those universities. And those FOIA requests have been hanging around for a long time now, and we've finally gotten to the point where we've gone to the FOIC to challenge them because, FOIA requires a prompt response, and we haven't had that from these universities, although we have what is an unfortunately typical fashion for public agencies in the state. The minute we've gone to the FOIC, we have, of course, seen them suddenly produce documents that before they were saying, oh, it's going to take some time to get to you.
Yep. So we went to Hartford as part of this FOIC challenge. You have to show up and you have to make an argument in front of an administrator, I guess the acting judge for the issue, and we argued that we want the whole record. We also wanted the redactions that UConn had made to be reviewed, and we want them fined. We want them to be held accountable for really dragging us out. I know you said it's been more than a year. It's been almost 2 years now since we requested this information, and it was fascinating. So we're sitting in the room, and just because of who I am, I arrived like an hour early, and I'm in the room, and I was talking to the attorney who's representing UConn, and it was an incredibly frustrating experience because this woman was adamant that they had done nothing wrong. She actually asked me, off the record before, hey, is this going to, do you have issues with our redactions? And I said, yeah, absolutely we do. We have no idea. You didn't tell us why you made the redactions. You didn't argue, you didn't provide us what is required so we can decide whether or not we want to challenge them. And she was like, well, we do everything we can to, provide full records and prevent sexual misconduct on at UConn. And it was a little bit of an eyebrow raising moment, frankly, just to have UConn officials tell me that they don't believe that they've done anything wrong. I think that led into the actual arguments that they made as well, where they actually told us that once they provided us a very small number of records, that they had actually closed our request and started treating uh, any subsequent information they provided as an entirely different FOIA request. Now, they didn't tell us that, which I think is probably the nail in the coffin. It didn't seem like the hearing officer was persuaded by their argument in that case. But that I think kind of gets to the heart of it. Are we going to play games about sexual misconduct, or are we going to do our due diligence to fact check and make sure that kids aren't being abused? At the end of the day, I know that's why we're here. That's what we're trying, the corruption that we are trying to fix. And I think that to hear someone say that they have an entirely different set of priorities was jarring, especially from someone who's making $170,000 a year on the taxpayer dime. That's wild to me.
Yeah. And in that vein, this is being kind of drawn out by them. And I want to go back to the redaction issue and make sure that we broach this. Right, because as you said, initially they didn't really tell us what the redactions were for. They made some kind of offhand comment about it was to protect student privacy or something like that. But under FOIA, you have to cite the actual statutory exemption that you're claiming, which they didn't do. We asked them to follow up, and they did, and they said that they had exempted information under two separate exemptions. But the problem is, right, we had, probably 50, 60 pages of documents, at least, potentially more than that, where, redactions had been made and we didn't know what had been claimed under what, which makes it difficult for us to kind of go in and challenge and say, determine whether or not those were proper redactions or not. And of course, the big issue here, as with pretty much all educational records, is FERPA, right? Which is the federal law that protects student privacy and protects certain information, but not all, from being turned over without permission from that student or their guardian if they're underage. And what we found out at that hearing is that they're claiming essentially the broadest interpretation of FERPA possible. There is information in these records that we know is a reference to a semester. It's like spring 2025. That's just an example. We don't know what the actual is, but like that is for sure what is actually in the records. They redacted that under FERPA. That does not meet the definition of a FERPA protected record. It has to be directly related to a student, and it has to be maintained by a university. That's a spring 2025 or whatever the actual, phrase is, does not meet that definition. But not only are they improperly claiming that, but when the hearing officer indicated that they might order that UConn turn over the unredacted records for in-camera review so they can make determinations about whether those exemptions are improper, they decided that they're going to fight it and say we can't do that because even providing those records would violate FERPA. Which I think I don't know about you, Connor, but my mind was blown when they tried to pull that, and the hearing officer didn't seem too pleased about it either. Come to find out, I did a little digging into the FOIC cases that have been settled already. UConn has tried to do this before, and a court essentially told them no, they can't do that, and ordered them to turn over the records for in-camera review. So when you're talking about $170,000 a year of taxpayer money for this person's salary, again, they are expending that salary, which you as a taxpayer are paying for, on fighting that transparency effort in a tactic that has not worked in the past.
There's two elements of this that I want to take a little further. The first is, as you know said, that they redacted things that were not specifically they're not able to do under FERPA, but they actually spoke to that in the hearing too, and they said, no, no, our obligation is to go above and beyond what the law says to make redactions that we think are appropriate. Now, that's certainly an argument to be made, but I think where this gets curious and where it gets into something that really flies in the face of good practice is they are also claiming that they cannot be fact checked on that, right? So this is the two parts of this argument I think are what really makes it fall on its face. We have extra powers. We can go above and beyond the law to basically, protect students. No clear legal definition of what that means. But on the second part, we're not going to let the FOIC, the body that is supposed to have in camera review power to make sure that it's done properly, we are going to fight them tooth and nail, going as far as to, likely push this into Superior Court uh, to say that we're not going to let you take a closer look at this. I don't think they can have it both ways. And, I'm not an attorney, but it seems like a strategic misstep to basically walk in there and be like, yeah, we kind of don't care what you think. I mean, I was almost literally told that in the, before the hearing, but then to have them say that and provide this letter from their chief attorney at UConn, basically saying like, go pound sand, FOIC. Oh boy. I mean,
Yeah.
this was just audio, not video, but to see the eyebrows go up around the room at that moment, I just kept my mouth shut and kind of watched this unfold. Fascinating.
Right, absolutely. And let's not forget that UConn has been one, or various employees at UConn, I don't want to ascribe it to the school per se, has been one of the chief proponents of the bill that has come up multiple times in recent years to make public universities exempt from FOIA, to essentially, put them away from public scrutiny. And it seems like they're already acting like that bill has been passed. Fortunately, it has not. It failed again this year. And they shouldn't be subject to that kind of review or transparency. I mean, that's certainly what that attitude says to me.
Yeah. And again, I think that there's a lot of different records that we would be covered under the bill that you're talking about, but especially in this case, this is such a clear-cut case of wanting to get facts right, wanting the public to understand clearly how accountability happens when sexual misconduct is alleged. And I think even without the additional records, it's pretty clear that people are, without a doubt, allowed to retire and still collect taxpayer benefits without a finding of fact. So basically, if you're close enough to retirement, you're allowed to ride off into the sunset after doing potentially life altering, horrible acts to children. I mean, this is on its face something that needs to be known. We need to understand this, especially when you're talking about billions and billions of dollars being taken out of people's pockets to fund these salaries, fund these programs. If no one's allowed to look, journalists, we've seen in CSCU, students who have been sexually and physically assaulted are not allowed to be part of the process, or do not know how their alleged assaulter was treated or held accountable, if at all. And now saying that the government officials who are supposed to have oversight also can't look. Who's watching the watchers here? There needs to be a voice of reason in the room, and frankly, we're happy to be the ones pushing on this. I think it is absolutely core to our mission that we push forward on this. Our job is to root out corruption, and I can think of very few things more cut and dry, black and white here than again, physical and sexual abuse of students by faculty and staff at a public university.
Yeah. And I think it's important not to fall into the trap of, UConn is saying, oh, we can't release this information in the interest of, student safety, as if by pushing them to follow FOIA and not over redact things we're somehow against student safety. When, you look at our record, we don't publish the names of underage people, even if they're in public documents. We go in and we make the steps to redact those. We take that stuff very seriously, but it doesn't really serve student safety if information that is critical to that accountability and to, as you know, you just described, holding people who are in some cases having inappropriate sexual relationships with students, that is helping shield that wrongdoing and ensuring that it's not held to account, which increases the possibility that it could happen again to another student.
Absolutely. That's incredibly well said. I mean, that really hits the nail on the head. So, for all of you watching, listening, tuning in, I think you can probably tell from both of us just this is a fight that we take seriously, right? I think that, I think I've said this before, maybe even on this program, but, Catherine could be writing somewhere else. We could all have different jobs, but there's a reason that we're here fighting corruption. It's because we actually do care. We want to see these positive results. And I really respect the passion that you bring to this job every day, Catherine, especially on the transparency stuff, where I know you have just this wealth of knowledge that we certainly rely on. And I know even outside of our newsroom, a lot of people rely on you for that. Um, I will just say, anyone who is interested in pursuing transparency in the state of Connecticut, if you're running into FOIA issues, if you've been turned away, if similarly someone is making an argument that they don't owe you public records, reach out to Catherine. Reach out to our newsroom, Catherine at insideinvestigator.org. And I know that she certainly can't write about every single tip that comes in, because there are dozens and dozens and dozens sitting on her plate already. But she is thorough, and she really gets the job done on this front. Catherine,
Yeah.
before we wrap up, anything else?
Yeah, I just add to that, even if we can't write a news story about you, if you need help with a flare request or something like that, please don't hesitate to reach out, because we will absolutely try to help you with that. I think I have 6 different people right now I'm talking to involved in, some sort of situation like that. So, we're very happy to be a resource and to also help increase transparency that way, even if it's not, in hard journalism.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's put a bow on it there. You may have noticed I'll be curious to see how the video and audio turns out for this. We're trying a new recording platform this week that will also give us the ability to do these shows live in the future. So our hope is to be able to broadcast this on Facebook and YouTube and Twitch and X and pretty much all across the internet, which will also give folks the ability to, in real time, ask questions and provide comments about what we're talking about. So this is still going to be available on CT Politics TV and recorded and available on all your favorite podcast platforms. But we also want to make sure that this program is becoming more accessible and put out into the world a little more widely. Also partially, as I mentioned, as a service to better engage with folks in real time. We know that there are so many people out there who are impacted by corruption. And if we can do a better job creating that direct line of communication, it will allow us to better pursue our mission of getting that corruption out of Connecticut in service to our readers. Thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for paying attention. Thank you for joining in the fight to root out corruption in the state of Connecticut. We'll be back in 2 weeks, perhaps live. And until then, be well, stay safe, and stay informed.